The Mall of America is big enough to fit 7 Yankee stadiums inside it, which means there are plenty of places where the security cameras can't see you, and plenty of corners where sound doesn't travel the way it should. I work the overnight maintenance shift, walking through 2.5 million square feet of empty retail space, while 40 million annual visitors sleep safely in their beds, unaware that the mall never really closes. It just changes into something different when the lights dim and the storefronts go dark. What most people don't know is that we're built on top of Metropolitan Stadium, where the Minnesota Twins played baseball for 20 years before they tore it down. And sometimes late at night I can still hear the ghost of crowd noise echoing through the empty corridors. Last week, I found a child's shoe in the middle of the rotunda at 3 a.m., small and pink with cartoon characters on the Velcro straps, sitting perfectly centered on the floor like someone had placed it there on purpose. The shoe was warm to the touch, even though the mall's climate control keeps everything at a steady 68 degrees. And when I picked it up, I could swear I heard a little girl laughing somewhere in the distance. Not the happy laughter you hear during operating hours, but something hollow and echoing, like it was coming from very far away, or very long ago. My name is Eric Lindqvist, and I've been cleaning these halls for 3 years now, since I moved down from Duluth after the iron ore plant closed. Bloomington seemed like a fresh start, close enough to Minneapolis for decent work, far enough from the range to forget about the layoffs that gutted my hometown. The job posting on Indeed.com mentioned flexible overnight hours and competitive pay for custodial experience, but never mentioned the employee handbook addendum they hand you after the first week. That addendum sits in my toolbox right now, laminated and creased from handling, containing 7 rules that management insists are safety protocols for after-hours operations. They don't call them rules, they call them protocols, like we're running some kind of laboratory instead of mopping floors and emptying trash bins. The head of facilities, a weathered woman named Ingrid Haugen, who's worked here since before the grand opening in 1992, handed me that sheet with the kind of look you give someone before delivering bad news. Some buildings hold on to their past, she said, her accent still thick with Norwegian roots from her grandparents in Minnehaha County. This place holds on to more than most. The pay is too good to walk away from. $23 an hour plus overtime, enough to cover my studio apartment near Fort Snelling and still send money back to my mom in Two Harbors. But every night, when I badge in through the employee entrance near Nordstrom and grab my cart from the maintenance closet, I feel like I'm entering something that pretends to be a shopping center during the day, but becomes something else entirely when the last customer leaves and the metal security gates roll down with their echoing finality. The protocols were printed on cheap copy paper, the kind that leaves your fingers dusty when you handle it too much. Ingrid handed them to me on my 8th night, right after I'd finished sanitizing the food court and was heading toward the Camp Snoopy area with my vacuum. "Eric?" she called from behind the customer service desk, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of the ventilation systems. "Come here a minute." I wheeled my cart over, noting how different the mall looked at midnight compared to the chaos of Black Friday shoppers I'd seen in news footage. Without the crowds, you could actually appreciate the architecture, the skylights overhead revealing patches of star-filled Minnesota sky, the way the 4 levels created this vertical canyon of storefronts that stretched up toward the glass ceiling. "You've been doing good work," Ingrid said, pulling the laminated sheet from a manila folder. "But there are some additional guidelines for the overnight crew. Safety measures." She handed me the paper, and I noticed her fingernails were bitten down to the quick, not the hands of someone who felt comfortable in her own workplace. Overnight maintenance protocols, Mall of America for authorized personnel only. Protocol 1. Between 12 a.m. and 6 a.m., avoid direct eye contact with any children you may encounter in the mall. Report their presence to security immediately via radio, but do not approach or speak to them. Protocol 2. The carousel in Camp Snoopy operates automatically during overnight hours. Do not attempt to shut it down or investigate why it runs. Clean around it, not near it. Protocol 3. If you hear carnival music coming from Nickelodeon Universe after 2 a.m., exit the area immediately and complete your tasks in a different section of the mall. Return after 4 a.m. Protocol 4. Maintenance elevators may stop on floors that do not exist. If an elevator opens to reveal anything other than a recognizable mall level, press the emergency button and wait for security escort. Protocol 5. The former Metropolitan Stadium home plate marker in the rotunda must remain uncovered at all times. Do not mop or place any object on the brass plaque embedded in the floor. Protocol 6. Store mannequins that have moved from their display positions should be reported but not touched. Document their new locations with your phone camera and include timestamps. Protocol 7. Between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., announce your presence loudly when entering any new section of the mall. This includes saying your full name and employee ID number. I read through the list twice, waiting for Ingrid to crack a smile or explain the joke. Instead, she pulled out a worn radio from the desk drawer. "Channel 7 is for security," she said, clipping it to my uniform shirt. "Channel 3 is for me. Don't use Channel 5. That's reserved for situations we hope you never encounter." "Ingrid, what kind of situations are we talking about here?" She glanced toward the main entrance, where the metal security gates created a barrier between us and the outside world. Through the glass doors, I could see the mostly empty parking lot stretching toward Interstate 494, dotted with a few overnight security vehicles and employee cars. "This place was built over a lot of history," she said finally. "The stadium, sure, but before that it was wetlands. Marsh ground. Sometimes things that got buried don't stay buried, especially in a place where this many people come and go every day." I folded the protocols and slipped them into my back pocket. "And these rules keep me safe from what, exactly?" "From making the kind of mistakes that get you transferred to day shift," she said. But her voice carried weight that suggested day shift wasn't the worst possible outcome. The radio crackled to life, and a voice I didn't recognize came through Channel 7. "Security to maintenance. We have eyes on a code yellow near the Apple Store. Single juvenile, approximately 6 years old, purple dress. Maintenance should avoid the second level east wing until further notice." Ingrid met my eyes and pointed to Protocol 1 on the paper in my hand. "Questions?" I shook my head, grabbed my cart, and started walking toward the west wing, wondering what I'd gotten myself into and whether $23 an hour was really worth it. The first hour passed without incident. I worked my way through the lower level, emptying trash bins and spot cleaning the terrazzo floors that had been installed to match the original stadium's color scheme, a detail most visitors never noticed. The mall felt different at night, like a theater after the audience has gone home. The storefronts stood dark behind their security gates, and my footsteps echoed off the high ceilings in ways that seemed to multiply and scatter. Around 1:15 a.m., I was mopping near the Victoria's Secret when I heard it. The faint sound of carousel music drifting down from the third level, where Camp Snoopy occupied the mall's center court. Not the tinny electronic version they played during operating hours, but something older, like a real steam-powered calliope from a county fair. Protocol 2 flashed through my mind. The carousel operates automatically during overnight hours. Do not attempt to shut it down or investigate why it runs. I continued mopping, trying to focus on the familiar rhythm of the work, but the music seemed to grow louder. It had that warped underwater quality that old recordings get when the playback speed isn't quite right. Between the notes, I could hear the mechanical whir of the carousel platform rotating, the gentle creak of the support poles rising and falling. My radio crackled. "Maintenance, this is Security Station Alpha. You copy?" I clipped the mop to my cart and grabbed the radio. "This is Eric. Go ahead. We show you're near the Central Court area. You hearing anything unusual tonight?" Through the radio static, I could still hear the carousel music. "Yeah, sounds like the carousel is running up in Camp Snoopy." "Copy that. That's normal after midnight. Stay on your current level and continue your route. Do not go upstairs to investigate." The emphasis on "do not" suggested this wasn't the first time a maintenance worker had been curious about the overnight carousel operation. "Roger," I said. But as I continued mopping, questions nagged at me. Why would a carousel run all night with no riders? Was it some kind of mechanical test? Or did the insurance company require it to cycle through its range of motion to prevent the machinery from seizing up? The music stopped abruptly at 1:47 a.m., according to my phone. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound had been, like the sudden quiet after a thunderstorm passes. I finished the lower level and took the service elevator up to level 2, where my next assignment was the area around Barnes & Noble and the Microsoft store. The elevator climbed past the mezzanine level, past level 2, and kept going. The button panel showed I'd pressed 2, but the elevator continued ascending. According to the indicator, we were now passing level 4, even though the mall only had 4 floors and the indicator was showing 5. Protocol 4: maintenance elevators may stop on floors that do not exist. My thumb found the emergency button and pressed it. The elevator shuddered to a stop, and the doors slid open to reveal nothing. Not a hallway, not a maintenance area, just empty air and the distant view of the parking lot through what should have been solid wall. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and asphalt. I jammed the emergency button again and again until the doors finally closed. The elevator descended normally this time, stopping at level 2 with a soft ding. When the doors opened, I stepped out on shaking legs and immediately grabbed my radio. "Security Station Alpha, this is Eric. I need a security escort." "Copy, Eric. What's your location?" "Level 2, East Wing near Barnes & Noble. I just experienced a Protocol 4 situation." There was a pause, then, "Stay put. Officer Peterson is en route." While I waited, I pulled out my phone and checked the time. 2:03 a.m. The carousel music should have stopped for good now, but as I listened, I could hear something else drifting down from the upper levels. Not carousel music, but the distant sound of children laughing and the electronic beeps and bells of arcade games. Nickelodeon Universe. Protocol 3. If you hear carnival music coming from Nickelodeon Universe after 2 a.m., exit the area immediately. But this wasn't carnival music. This was arcade sounds, video game bleeps, the hydraulic hiss of animatronic dinosaurs. Was that different? The protocol specifically mentioned carnival music, not arcade sounds. Officer Peterson arrived 5 minutes later. A tall man with graying temples and the kind of steady walk that suggested he'd been dealing with overnight situations for years. He wore the standard MOA security uniform, but carried additional equipment on his belt, items I couldn't identify in the dim lighting. "You okay, Eric?" "Yeah, just the elevator thing. Went to a floor that doesn't exist." He nodded like this was routine maintenance reporting. "Which direction did it face?" "East, toward the parking lot. I could see outside through what should have been wall." Peterson made a note on a small pad. "Anything else?" "Sounds, smells, temperature changes. Cold air. Smelled like rain. I hesitated, then added, "And I can hear arcade sounds from Nickelodeon Universe." His expression shifted slightly. What kind of arcade sounds? Video games, maybe some of the ride machinery. Not carnival music, just normal arcade noise. Peterson checked his watch. 2:08 a.m. "You're right, that's not covered by Protocol 3, but I'd still avoid that area tonight if I were you. Sometimes the protocols don't cover every possibility." He walked me back to the service elevator and watched as I pressed the button for level 1. "Stick to the lower levels for the rest of your shift," he said as the doors closed. "And Eric? If anything else happens, anything at all, call immediately. Don't try to figure it out yourself." Hi everyone. Before we move forward, I have something exciting to tell you. Many of you asked for stories without the strange rules, so I created a brand new channel just for that. It's called Mr. Grimm Archive. The link is in the description, or you can click the card above. I think you'll really enjoy it. So check it out whenever you want some more exciting types of stories. Also, I hope you're enjoying the 2 uploads a day. Let me know in the comments if you like some stories from your location. Now, let's continue with today's story. I spent the next hour on level 1, working through the department stores and specialty shops near the main entrances. The familiar routine of emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces helped settle my nerves after the elevator incident. By 3:15 a.m., I'd made it to the rotunda, the central hub where all 4 wings of the mall converged under the massive skylight. The home plate marker sat exactly where it always did, a brass plaque embedded in the terrazzo floor, marking the exact spot where home plate had been positioned in Metropolitan Stadium. During operating hours, kids would stand on it and pretend to bat while their parents took photos. Tonight, it gleamed under the security lighting, polished to a mirror finish. Protocol 5 had been specific. The former Metropolitan Stadium home plate marker must remain uncovered at all times. Do not mop or place any object on the brass plaque. I'd always assumed this was some kind of historical preservation rule, the mall management keeping the baseball heritage visible for visitors. But as I began mopping around it in a careful circle, leaving the plaque completely dry, I noticed something that made me pause. The brass was warm, not just room temperature warm, but actually heated, like it had been sitting in direct sunlight. I knelt down and held my hand about 6 inches above the surface. Heat radiated upward, creating a small column of warm air that felt oddly humid compared to the mall's climate-controlled atmosphere. My radio crackled. "All maintenance personnel, this is Security Station Alpha. We need position reports." I grabbed the radio, still crouched beside the home plate marker. "This is Eric, Level 1 Rotunda, near the home plate memorial." "Copy that, Eric. Any activity in your area?" I glanced around the empty rotunda, then down at the warm brass plaque. "Negative. All quiet here." "Good. Continue your route, and remember Protocol 7 goes into effect in 45 minutes. Protocol 7. Between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., announce your presence loudly when entering any new section of the mall." As I finished mopping around the rotunda and headed toward the east wing, I started thinking about that protocol. Why would I need to announce myself? To whom? The mall was supposed to be empty except for security and maintenance staff, all of whom had radios for communication. I pushed my cart toward Macy's, planning to clean the bathrooms near the department store entrance. The east wing felt different from the central rotunda, darker somehow, even though the same security lighting ran throughout the mall. The storefronts seemed to press closer together, creating pools of shadow between the illuminated areas. As I approached the bathroom entrance, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. Inside the Macy's storefront, behind the security gate, one of the mannequins had shifted position. I stopped and stared through the metal grating. The female mannequin that should have been posed with one hand on her hip, modeling a red business suit, now stood with both arms hanging straight down at her sides. Her head, which had been tilted slightly to the left in a casual pose, now faced directly forward, looking straight out through the security gate. Looking straight at me. Protocol 6. Store mannequins that have moved from their display positions should be reported but not touched. Document their new locations with your phone camera and include timestamps. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and took several photos through the security gate, making sure the timestamp was visible in the shots. The camera flash reflected off the mannequin's plastic face, creating harsh shadows that made her features look more defined than they should have been. More human. "Security Station Alpha, this is Eric," I said into the radio, my voice coming out higher than I intended. "Go ahead, Eric." "I have a Protocol 6 situation, East Wing, Macy's storefront. Female mannequin has moved from her display position." "Copy that. Document with photos and continue your route. Do not approach the storefront." "Already got the photos," I said. But as I looked back at the mannequin, my stomach dropped. She had moved again. Now her right arm was raised, pointing directly at the bathroom entrance I'd been heading toward. I took another photo, hands shaking badly enough that I had to take 3 shots to get one that wasn't blurred. "Security. The mannequin just moved again. It's pointing toward the men's bathroom." There was a longer pause this time. "Eric, exit the East Wing immediately and proceed to a different section of the mall. We'll handle the bathroom cleaning in that area." I didn't need to be told twice. I turned my cart around and headed back toward the rotunda, but as I walked away, I could feel the mannequin's plastic gaze following me. I forced myself not to look back. By the time I reached the West Wing, it was 2:58 a.m. 2 minutes until Protocol 7 went into effect. I parked my cart near the entrance to the West Wing corridor and checked my watch. 2:59, 3:00. Eric Lindqvist, employee ID 4847, entering West Wing Level 1, I called out in a loud, clear voice. My words echoed off the high ceiling and bounced between the storefronts. The echo came back wrong. Instead of my voice fading naturally, it seemed to hang in the air, then repeat itself in a slightly different tone. Not quite an echo. More like someone else had spoken the same words a fraction of a second after me, matching my inflection but with a subtle difference in pitch. I stood still, listening, but the only sound was the usual hum of the ventilation system and the distant rumble of traffic on Interstate 494. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish but following what seemed to be the spirit of the protocol. This time, the echo came back as a whispered, "Hello." That definitely wasn't my voice. It sounded younger, like a child trying to mimic an adult's speech pattern. My radio crackled. "Eric, we're showing elevated electromagnetic activity in your area. Continue your route but maintain vocal announcements every 5 minutes, until 4 a.m. I grabbed my cart and started moving through the West Wing, stopping to empty trash bins and spot clean as needed. Every 5 minutes, I announced my presence. Eric Lindqvist, employee 4847, continuing maintenance in West Wing. And every time, that whispered echo came back, getting clearer and more distinct. By 3:45 a.m., the echo had evolved into something that sounded almost conversational, like someone was trying to have a discussion with me through repetition. When I announced, "Eric Lindqvist, employee 4847, 15 minutes remaining in West Wing," the whispered response came back as, "Eric, Eric, Why are you here, Eric? I stopped cleaning and grabbed my radio. Security, this is Eric. The echo situation in West Wing has escalated. It's starting to interact. Copy that, Eric. Maintain your position, but cease all announcements until 4 a.m. We're sending Officer Peterson to escort you out of that section. I stood beside my cart, surrounded by the quiet storefronts of the West Wing, waiting for Peterson and trying not to think about why the mall needed protocols like these in the first place. Whatever had happened here over the years, whatever accumulated in a place where millions of people had walked and talked and lived their daily lives, it seemed to be getting stronger. Officer Peterson found me standing beside my cart near Spencer's, staring at the security gate and trying not to listen to the whispers that had started coming from inside the closed stores. Not echoes of my announcements anymore, but actual conversations in languages I couldn't identify, drifting through the metal grating like radio static between stations. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Peterson said, though his tone suggested he'd made that joke before under similar circumstances. "Something like that?" I gestured toward the Spencer's storefront. "You hear that?" He stopped and tilted his head, listening. From inside the store came the faint sound of multiple voices overlapping, rising and falling in what might have been conversation or argument. The words were unclear, but the emotional tone carried through, urgent, frustrated, pleading. "How long has this been going on?" Peterson asked. "Started about 10 minutes ago. First just in Spencer's, but now it's coming from Hot Topic and GameStop too." Peterson pulled a small device from his belt that looked like a radio, but had a digital display showing fluctuating numbers. He pointed it toward the storefronts, and the numbers spiked into red territory. "EMF readings are off the charts," he said. "We need to get you out of this wing." As we walked back toward the rotunda, Peterson explained what the overnight security team had learned over the years. The mall sits on what used to be a wetland before they built the stadium. Lots of organic matter got buried when they filled it in. Plants, animals, probably some things that shouldn't be disturbed. Add in 20 years of baseball crowds, then 30 years of shoppers, and you get a place that holds onto energy. What kind of energy? Emotions, mostly. Strong feelings leave impressions. A kid losing their first tooth at the dental clinic. Teenagers having their first dates at the food court. Families arguing about money while Christmas shopping. It all builds up. We passed through the rotunda, where I noticed the home plate marker was glowing faintly now, like heated metal fresh from a forge. Peterson saw me looking and shook his head. "That's been happening more often lately. Started about 6 months ago, right around the time we hired the new overnight crew." "You think it's connected to us?" "Not to you specifically, but fresh people seem to activate things, like the place is curious about newcomers." We entered the north wing, and Peterson checked his watch. 3:52 a.m. 8 more minutes until Protocol 7 expires. Then we can get you back to normal cleaning duties. That's when we heard the child laughing. It started as a giggle, echoing down from somewhere on the upper levels. Not the hollow, distant laughter I'd heard on my first night when I found the warm shoe, but bright and immediate, like a little girl playing hide-and-seek just around the corner. Peterson's hand went to his radio immediately. "Security Station Alpha. This is Peterson. We have audible juvenile contact in the north wing. Requesting immediate backup." "Copy that, Peterson. All units converge on North Wing Level 1. "Eric," Peterson said, his voice carrying new urgency. "Protocol 1 is now in effect. Do not look directly at any children you may see. If you spot movement in your peripheral vision, point me toward it, but keep your eyes down." We continued walking through the north wing, past Barnes and Noble and the Microsoft store, but the laughter seemed to follow us. Sometimes it came from ahead, sometimes from behind, occasionally from above, as if someone was running along the upper level parallel to our path. The impressions? The energy patterns that manifest as human figures. She looked up from her tablet. Eric, what you saw wasn't a real child. It was something wearing the shape of a child, like a recording playing back on equipment that's not quite calibrated right. Why do the protocols exist if this place is so dangerous? Because someone has to maintain it, Ingrid said. And the protocols work, mostly. Follow them exactly, and you'll be safe. Break them. She gestured toward me. And we have situations like tonight. She finished her notes and looked at me directly. The question now is whether you want to continue working here. No shame in walking away. We've had plenty of people decide the overnight shift isn't for them. I thought about my studio apartment, my mom back in Two Harbors, the iron ore plant that would never reopen. $23 an hour was still $23 an hour, even if it came with supernatural hazards. I'll stay, I said, but I want to understand what I'm dealing with. Ingrid smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Understanding comes with time. For now, just focus on following the protocols. They were written in blood, Eric, literally. Don't forget that. Harold spent 6 weeks in the hospital, mostly for observation and physical therapy to help his body readjust to normal activity levels after decades of limited movement. The media called it a miracle, though they never got the full story. How do you explain to reporters that ghost children led rescuers to a man who'd been forgotten by bureaucracy and lost building records? The mall management offered Harold a settlement that would have kept him comfortable for the rest of his life, but he turned it down. Instead, he asked for a job. They made him a daytime maintenance supervisor. And now he walks the same corridors he'd heard echoing above him for 30 years, this time in sunlight with the sounds of families and shoppers around him. I still work the overnight shift. $23 an hour is still $23 an hour, and after everything that happened, I've developed an attachment to the place that goes beyond simple employment. Astrid stayed too, though she transferred to evening maintenance so she could overlap with Harold's day shift training. The protocols still exist, but they had been revised. Dr. Chen worked with Harold to understand what had really been happening during all those years of manifestations. The children weren't threats. They were helpers, emotional impressions of kids who had loved coming to twins games and couldn't rest while someone was trapped in the ruins of their special place. The mannequins moving, the toys arranging themselves, even the carousel running at odd hours. It had all been attempts to get someone's attention, to communicate that help was needed. Protocol 1 now reads, if you encounter children during overnight hours, maintain respectful distance, but do not automatically avoid interaction. Listen carefully to what they might be trying to communicate. The rest have been similarly updated to acknowledge that the manifestations might have purpose beyond simple haunting. The home plate marker still warms up during overnight hours, but Harold says that's normal. It always did that, even during his stadium days. It's the emotional center of the place, he explained. All those years of people caring deeply about what happened on that spot. That kind of energy doesn't just disappear when you build something new on top of it. The mall feels different now. Quieter, more settled. Like a house where a long-running argument has finally been resolved. I still hear carousel music and arcade sounds during the overnight hours, but they feel celebratory rather than desperate. The children still appear occasionally, but now they wave when they see me, and sometimes I wave back. Ingrid retired shortly after Harold's rescue, saying she'd accomplished what she'd stayed to do. Keep people safe while the building worked through whatever it needed to work through. Her replacement is a younger woman named Katie Olafson, who grew up in Richfield and remembers coming to Twins games as a kid. She understands the emotional geography of the place in ways that make her perfect for the job. I've started taking classes at Normandale Community College, thinking about a degree in facility management or maybe social work. The iron ore plant in Duluth is never reopening, and I've made peace with that. Minnesota has plenty of places where people need help, where institutional memory gets lost, where someone needs to pay attention to the stories that buildings tell. 3 weeks had passed since my first Protocol 1 violation, and I'd learned to navigate the overnight shift with something approaching confidence. The protocols had become second nature. Announce yourself during the danger hour. Avoid eye contact with children. Stay away from the carousel. Document but don't touch the mannequins. The pay was steady, and I'd even started sending extra money home to help my mom with her prescription costs. Tonight felt different, though. Ingrid had mentioned during the shift briefing that they were breaking in a new overnight maintenance worker, a woman named Astrid Blomberg, who'd moved down from International Falls after her husband's logging company went under. She'd be working the East Wing while I handled the West, and we'd meet in the middle around 2 a.m. to coordinate the rotunda cleaning. I was working through level 2 of the West Wing when my radio crackled to life at 1:47 a.m. "Eric, this is Astrid. You copy?" "Yeah, I'm here." "How's your first night going?" "Pretty quiet so far, but I wanted to ask you about something. There's a kid's toy in the middle of the escalator on level 3. Little red fire truck. Should I move it or report it?" I stopped mopping and grabbed the protocol sheet from my back pocket, scanning through the 7 rules. Nothing specifically about toys, but the general principle seemed clear. "Don't touch it," I said. "Document it with photos and report to security. Anything out of place during overnight hours gets reported first." "Copy that. Thanks." I continued cleaning, but something nagged at me about Astrid's call. The protocols were specific about children's shoes. I'd found that warm pink shoe on my first night. But toys hadn't been mentioned in my training. Maybe the rules evolved based on new experiences. Or maybe there were additional protocols that Ingrid only shared after you'd proven yourself reliable. 20 minutes later, Astrid's voice came through the radio again, but this time she sounded different, strained. "Eric, are you still on level 2 West Wing?" "Yeah, near Hot Topic. What's wrong?" "I need you to come to level 3 East Wing, near the Barnes and Noble escalator. Bring your camera." "Everything okay?" There was a pause, then, "Just come. And Eric, bring the protocols sheet." I abandoned my cart and took the stairs 2 at a time, emerging onto level 3 to find Astrid standing about 20 feet from the escalator, staring at the floor where she'd mentioned seeing the toy fire truck. The fire truck was still there, but it wasn't alone anymore. Arranged in a perfect circle around the red truck were dozens of other toys. Action figures, dolls, building blocks, stuffed animals. All of them looked well used. Loved, the kind of toys that children carry everywhere and can't sleep without. They formed a ring about 8 feet in diameter, with the fire truck sitting exactly in the center. "How long have you been standing here?" I asked. "About 10 minutes. When I first called you, it was just the fire truck. Then I turned around to get my camera, and when I looked back," she gestured at the circle, "all of this." I pulled out my phone and started taking photos, making sure to capture the timestamp and the precise arrangement. As I moved around the circle, trying to get different angles, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Each toy was positioned to face inward, toward the fire truck. The action figures stood in poses that suggested they were looking at the center of the circle. The dolls' heads were turned inward. Even the stuffed animals were arranged so their button eyes pointed toward the red truck. "We need to call security," I said. but as I reached for my radio, Astrid grabbed my arm. "Wait! Look at the fire truck." I focused on the center of the circle and saw what she meant. The fire truck was moving, not rolling or sliding, but rotating slowly clockwise, like it was on a tiny turntable. Each complete rotation took about 30 seconds, and as it turned, the other toys seemed to adjust their positions slightly, maintaining their inward focus. "This isn't covered by any protocol," Astrid said. She was right. The protocols mentioned children and their shoes, but nothing about toys that arranged themselves or moved independently. We were in uncharted territory. "Security Station Alpha, this is Eric," I said into the radio. "We have an unusual situation on Level 3, East Wing. Unknown protocol status." "Copy that, Eric. Describe the situation." I outlined what we'd found, including the fact that the toys had appeared while Astrid was momentarily distracted, and that the fire truck was now rotating on its own. "Are either of you experiencing any physical symptoms? Dizziness, nausea, temperature changes?" Astrid and I looked at each other. Now that security mentioned it, the area around the toy circle did feel different. Warmer, and the air had a thick quality that reminded me of the humidity before a summer thunderstorm. "Yeah," I said, "it's warmer here, and the air feels heavy. Exit that area immediately and proceed to Level 1. We're sending Officer Peterson and the specialist team." As we backed away from the circle, the fire truck's rotation slowed and stopped. The other toys remained in position, but their inward focus seemed to shift, following our movement. By the time we reached the stairs, I could swear the entire arrangement had turned to face our exit point. We met Peterson on Level 1, along with a woman I hadn't seen before. Tall, middle-aged, carrying a large duffel bag filled with electronic equipment. She introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chin, a paranormal researcher who contracted with the mall's management for unusual situations. "How long have you been working here?" she asked me. "About a month." "And you?" she asked Astrid. "This is my first shift." Dr. Chen made notes on a tablet. "New personnel often trigger increased activity." The impressions left in this place seemed to respond to fresh psychic signatures. People who haven't been inoculated by prolonged exposure. She pulled a device from her bag that looked like a modified tablet with additional sensors attached. "I'm going to take some readings from Level 3. You two wait here with Officer Peterson." While she was gone, Peterson explained what he knew about the toy phenomenon. Started about 2 years ago. First time, it was just a few items arranged in the rotunda. Management thought it was a prank. Maybe day shift employees setting up a joke for the overnight crew. But security cameras never caught anyone placing the toys. So this has happened before? Twice. Both times during the first week of a new maintenance worker's employment. Both times the arrangements were more elaborate than the previous occurrence. Dr. Chen returned 15 minutes later with readings that made her frown at her tablet screen. "Electromagnetic anomalies are consistent with previous events, but the thermal signatures are much stronger," she said. "Whatever creates these manifestations is getting more powerful." "What does that mean for us?" Astrid asked. "It means we need to add an 8th protocol," Dr. Chen said, looking at Ingrid, who had arrived while she was taking readings upstairs. Ingrid pulled out a laminated sheet and a permanent marker. In careful handwriting, she added to the list, "Protocol 8. If toys or personal items appear in organized arrangements during overnight hours, do not disturb the arrangement. Document with photos and contact security immediately. Evacuate the area until morning shift arrives." "This is a temporary measure," Ingrid explained. "We'll need to monitor the situation and potentially revise based on future incidents." As she handed us the updated protocol sheets, I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. In all my interactions with Ingrid, She'd always seemed unflappable, someone who'd seen everything the overnight shift could throw at her. Whatever was happening with the toys had rattled her in a way that the mannequins and child sightings hadn't. "Is it getting worse?" I asked. "The manifestations are becoming more complex," Dr. Chen answered before Ingrid could respond. "More organized, more purposeful. It's as if the energy patterns are learning, adapting to our presence and our protocols." "Learning what?" "How to get our attention. How to make us interact with them." She packed her equipment back into the duffel bag. "The protocols exist to minimize that interaction, to keep you safe by maintaining distance. But if the manifestations keep evolving..." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. The protocols might not be enough forever. For the rest of the shift, Astrid and I worked on level 1 only, while security maintained a perimeter around level 3. Every hour, Officer Peterson radioed to report that the toy circle remained intact, but inactive. At 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before sunrise, he reported that all the toys had vanished as suddenly as they'd appeared. When we clocked out at 6 a.m., I walked Astrid to her car in the employee parking lot. The morning sun was climbing over the eastern horizon, casting long shadows across the asphalt and making everything look normal and mundane again. "You coming back tomorrow night?" I asked. She looked back at the mall entrance, where early morning shoppers were already starting to arrive for the senior walking program. $23 an hour is hard to find around here, she said. And honestly, I'm curious what happens next. I knew exactly what she meant. Despite everything, the protocols, the manifestations, the growing sense that we were part of some larger pattern we didn't understand, I felt the same curiosity. The mall had gotten under my skin, become part of my routine, in a way that transcended simple employment. As I drove home to my studio apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that the toy circle had been a message of some kind, a communication attempt from whatever energy inhabited the mall's overnight hours. The question was whether we were supposed to figure out what it meant, or whether understanding it would be the biggest protocol violation of all. 2 months into the job, I'd developed what Ingrid called overnight intuition, the ability to sense when a shift was going to be challenging before anything actually went wrong. Tonight had that feeling from the moment I badged in. The air seemed thicker, the shadows between storefronts appeared darker, and the usual background hum of the building carried an undertone that set my teeth on edge. Astrid met me at the central rotunda at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before our shift officially started. She'd learned to arrive early, just like I had, using those extra minutes to acclimate to the mall's overnight personality. "Something feels off tonight," she said, adjusting the radio on her belt. I nodded toward the home plate marker, which was already showing a faint glow, even though we hadn't reached midnight yet. "Started early tonight. That's usually not a good sign." We split up to begin our respective routes, but I'd only made it halfway through the lower level of the West Wing when my radio crackled with Astrid's voice, tense and urgent. "Eric, I need you in the East Wing. Level 2, near the Victoria's Secret." "What's the situation?" "Multiple Protocol 6 violations. Bring your camera." I abandoned my cart and headed for the East Wing, taking the stairs 2 at a time. When I reached Level 2, I found Astrid standing in the middle of the corridor, slowly turning in a circle with her phone held up, taking continuous photos. Every single mannequin visible through the security gates had moved. Not just 1 or 2, like we'd seen before, but dozens of them throughout the wing. They stood in new positions, many of them pressed against the inside of the security gates, as if they'd been trying to get out. Their poses were no longer the casual, commercial arrangements designed to showcase clothing. Instead, they stood rigid and alert, like people who'd heard a suspicious noise and were listening for it to repeat. "When did you notice this?" I asked, pulling out my own phone to document the scene. "About 10 minutes ago. I was cleaning near Spencer's when I saw movement in my peripheral vision. Thought it was just one mannequin, but when I looked around..." She gestured at the transformed storefronts. I moved from gate to gate, photographing each display. At Hot Topic, 3 mannequins stood in a line facing outward, their heads turned to track my movement. In American Eagle, a male mannequin had somehow gotten his plastic hand wrapped around the security gate's bars, fingers curled like he was gripping prison cell doors. "Security Station Alpha, this is Eric. We have multiple Protocol 6 violations on Level 2 East Wing. Dozens of mannequins have moved position." "Copy that, Eric. Document everything and evacuate the area. We're sending Peterson and the specialist team." As we headed back toward the central rotunda, I noticed something that made me stop. In my peripheral vision, I could see mannequins in the storefronts we were passing continuing to move, adjusting their positions as we walked by. Not dramatic movements, just subtle shifts. A head turning, an arm repositioning, a change in stance. "Don't look directly at them," I told Astrid, "but I think they're still moving." "Moving how?" "Following us. Watching us." We reached the rotunda, where the home plate marker now glowed bright enough to read by. Astrid knelt down beside it, holding her hand above the surface. "It's getting hotter," she said. "Last week it was just warm, but now it's like a stovetop burner." That's when we heard the carousel music. But it was only 12:23 a.m., and the carousel in Camp Snoopy wasn't supposed to start its overnight cycle until after 1 a.m. More concerning, this wasn't the familiar steam calliope sound we'd grown accustomed to. This was children's music box melodies, thin and tinny, playing nursery rhymes at slightly the wrong speed. "Protocol 2, Astrid said, checking her watch. "But it's too early." "And it's the wrong kind of music," I added. My radio crackled. "All overnight personnel, this is Security Station Alpha. We're detecting anomalous activity throughout the facility. Implement all protocols immediately, regardless of normal timing parameters." The music from Camp Snoopy grew louder, joined by other sounds. The electronic beeps and chirps of arcade games from Nickelodeon Universe. The hydraulic hiss of animatronic displays. The distant laughter of children that could have been recordings or could have been something else entirely. "Eric," Astrid said, pointing toward the escalators that led to the upper levels. "Look." On Level 3, barely visible in the security lighting, small figures moved between the storefronts. Not the tall, distorted child I'd encountered weeks ago, but multiple smaller shapes, running and playing in the corridors like the mall was their personal playground. Protocol 1 was clear. Avoid eye contact. Report immediately. Don't approach. But there were so many of them, and they moved with the casual confidence of children who belonged there, who had every right to be running through the empty mall in the middle of the night. "Security, Mrs. Eric. We have multiple juvenile contacts on Level 3. Estimate 6 to 8 individuals, appearing to be children between ages 4 and 10. "Copy that. Do not approach Level 3 under any circumstances. We're implementing full lockdown procedures." "Lockdown? Remain in the central rotunda until further notice. Peterson is en route with additional personnel." As we waited, the supernatural activity continued to escalate around us. The carousel music shifted between different melodies, sometimes playing 3 different songs simultaneously in overlapping discord. The arcade sounds from Nickelodeon Universe grew louder, creating a cacophony of electronic noise that echoed through the empty corridors. And above it all, the children's laughter continued, moving between levels and wings like a game of tag played in 3 dimensions. The home plate marker beneath our feet had grown so hot that we could feel the warmth through the soles of our shoes. And when I looked up through the skylight, the stars seemed unusually bright, as if the glass had become more transparent, or the distance to the sky had somehow shortened. Peterson arrived with 3 other security officers I'd never seen before, all of them carrying equipment that looked more military than commercial. They set up a perimeter around the rotunda, facing outward toward the 4 wings of the mall. "What's the status on Level 2 East Wing?" Peterson asked. "All mannequins have repositioned," I reported. "They appear to be tracking movement, possibly still mobile." "And Level 3? Multiple child manifestations, active and mobile. They seem to be playing." Peterson's expression darkened. "Playing is new. Previous child contacts were isolated, stationary. Group activity suggests a significant escalation." Dr. Chen arrived 20 minutes later, her equipment bag supplemented by what looked like a military-grade communications rig. She immediately began taking readings, moving around the perimeter of the rotunda while the security team maintained their watch. "Electromagnetic readings are unlike anything I've recorded here before," she said after completing her initial survey. "The energy patterns aren't just stronger, they're more organized, more coherent. It's as if multiple manifestation events are being coordinated by a central intelligence." "What does that mean in practical terms?" Astrid asked. "It means the protocols may not be sufficient anymore. We're dealing with something that's learned to work around our safety measures." As if responding to her words, the elevator in the north wing dinged softly, and the doors slid open. The floor indicator showed B, basement level, but the Mall of America didn't have a basement. Through the open elevator doors, we could see darkness that seemed to extend much deeper than the building's foundation should allow. "Protocol 4, I said automatically. "Except no one called that elevator," Peterson pointed out, "and it's opened on its own." The children's laughter from Level 3 suddenly stopped, replaced by the sound of many small feet running toward the escalators. Not running away from something, but running toward it, like they'd been called to dinner. "They're heading for the elevator," one of the security officers reported. Dr. Chen's equipment began beeping rapidly, the display showing readings that spiked into ranges I'd never seen before. "Something's coming through," she said. "The manifestation is about to reach critical mass." Through the radio, we heard Officer Martinez from the perimeter. "I've got eyes on the juveniles. They're gathering at the elevator. Estimate 12 to 15 individuals now." The carousel music stopped abruptly, followed by the arcade sounds, until the mall fell into a silence so complete it felt like being inside a vacuum chamber. Even the building's ventilation system seemed to hold its breath. In that silence, a new sound emerged from the elevator shaft. Not mechanical, but organic. Like breathing, but scaled up to match the size of something much larger than human lungs could accommodate. "Everyone needs to leave the building," Dr. Chen said, her voice calm but carrying absolute authority. "Right now, this has moved beyond protocol management." "What about the morning shift?" Peterson asked. "Cancel it. The mall stays closed until we can figure out what's happening." As we gathered our equipment and prepared to evacuate, I looked back at the home plate marker one last time. It was glowing so brightly now that it hurt to look at directly, and the heat radiating from it had created a visible shimmer in the air above it. Whatever energy had been building in this place over the years, whatever had been contained by the protocols and managed by the overnight security team, it had finally reached a tipping point. The children were gathering, the manifestations were coordinating, and something was coming up from a basement that shouldn't exist. For the first time since I'd started working here, I wondered if $23 an hour was actually enough. The evacuation should have been simple. Badge out through the employee entrance and leave the building to whatever was rising from the elevator shaft. But as we reached the corridor leading to the exit, every door we'd used to enter the building was sealed shut, not locked, sealed, as if someone had welded the frames closed while we weren't looking. Emergency exits are blocked too, Officer Martinez reported over the radio. All physical barriers show the same condition. We're contained. Peterson tried his master key card on the employee entrance, then the emergency exit near Macy's, then the loading dock access. Nothing responded. The magnetic locks didn't even click. The doors had become as solid and fixed as the walls surrounding them. The building doesn't want us to leave, Dr. Chen said, studying her readings. The manifestations have gained enough coherence to manipulate physical systems. Through the skylights above, I could see the first hints of dawn approaching, maybe 2 hours until sunrise. If we could hold out until morning, the manifestations typically retreated, giving us a chance to escape when day shift arrived. But something told me we wouldn't last 2 hours at this escalation level. The breathing sound from the elevator had grown louder, more rhythmic, like something massive slowly waking up. And the children. We could hear them chattering excitedly near the elevator doors, their voices overlapping in ways that created harmonic patterns too complex for random conversation. "We need to get closer," I said, surprising myself with the words. "Eric, no." Astrid grabbed my arm. "Protocol 1 specifically says..." "The protocols aren't working anymore. Dr. Chen said it herself. We're beyond protocol management. Maybe it's time to try something different." Peterson stepped between me and the direction of the elevator. "My job is to keep you safe, and approaching active manifestations is the opposite of safe. Your job is to manage a situation that's spiraling out of control," I countered. "What if they don't want to hurt us? What if they're trying to communicate, and we've been avoiding them for years?" Dr. Chen looked up from her equipment. Eric might be right. The manifestations have been getting more elaborate, more organized. Tonight's events show coordination and planning. That suggests intent beyond simple psychic residue. The home plate marker beneath our feet had grown so hot that the air above it shimmered like asphalt in summer. But instead of being painful, the warmth felt almost welcoming, like sitting near a fireplace on a cold Minnesota night. "The stadium," I said suddenly. "It's not just built on top of Metropolitan Stadium. It's connected to it somehow. All the emotional energy from 20 years of baseball games, the crowds, the excitement, the disappointment. What if that's what's trying to communicate?" "Communicate what?" Peterson asked. Before I could answer, the children's voices from the elevator area changed. Instead of excited chatter, they began singing. Not a nursery rhyme or playground song, but "Take me out to the ball game," in high, clear voices that carried through the empty mall like a choir. "Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd." The carousel music from Camp Snoopy joined in, providing harmony to the children's melody. Then the arcade sounds from Nickelodeon Universe began keeping time, creating a rhythm section that turned the familiar song into something hauntingly beautiful. "They're not trying to scare us," Astrid said, understanding dawning in her voice. "They're trying to remind us what this place used to be." I started walking toward the elevator against Peterson's protests. The protocols had been designed to keep us separated from the manifestations. But maybe separation was the problem. Maybe 20 years of avoiding contact had left the stadium's energy with no other way to express itself, except through increasingly dramatic attempts to get our attention. The children fell silent as I approached the north wing, but I could see them now. Not the distorted, threatening figures the protocols had trained me to fear. but actual children in clothes from different decades. Some wore 1970s Twins jerseys. Others had the hairstyles and outfits of families from the 1980s. They stood around the open elevator in a circle, not menacing but curious, like kids waiting for something interesting to happen. "Eric Linkfist, employee ID 4847, I announced, following Protocol 7, even though the time restriction had long since passed. "I'm here to listen." The breathing from the elevator shaft stopped. The children turned to look at me, and for the first time since I'd started working here, I maintained eye contact with them. They had normal faces, sad maybe, but recognizably human. Real children who had spent time in this place when it was still a baseball stadium. Children who had come to games with their families and left emotional impressions so strong that 30 years later, they still echoed through the building. One of the children, a girl in a purple dress, who might have been the same one I'd encountered weeks ago, stepped forward and pointed down the elevator shaft. "He's been waiting," she said, in a voice that carried no distortion, no supernatural menace. Just the matter-of-fact tone of a child sharing important information. "He wants to go home." I looked down the elevator shaft and saw not a basement, but a tunnel that led deep underground, lined with concrete and steel, that looked like the infrastructure of a large building. Stadium infrastructure. "The stadium's still there," I said, understanding flooding through me. "Under the mall. They never completely demolished it." Dr. Chen had followed me, her equipment readings confirming what I'd realized. The electromagnetic signatures suggest a large hollow space beneath the building. If they left the stadium's lower levels intact when they built the mall, then someone's been trapped down there for 30 years, I finished. The children nodded in unison, their faces bright with relief that someone finally understood. The girl in the purple dress pointed to herself, then to the other children, then down the shaft. "We've been trying to help him," she said, "but we can't go that deep. We can only reach the mall levels. You have to help him." Peterson's radio crackled. "All units, be advised that city records show partial demolition of Metropolitan Stadium in 1985. Lower levels and foundation were sealed and built over, rather than excavated." "If someone was working down there when they sealed it," Astrid said. "Overnight maintenance," Dr. Chen added grimly. "Stadium maintenance crews work the same kinds of shifts we do. Someone could have been trapped when they closed off the lower levels." The children stepped aside, creating a clear path to the elevator. The breathing had resumed, but now it sounded labored, exhausted, like someone who had been calling for help for decades and was finally running out of strength. "I have to go down there," I said. Peterson shook his head. "Too dangerous. We'll contact city services, get proper equipment." In 30 years, no one has heard him calling. If we wait for bureaucracy, he might not last until morning. "There," I said, pointing toward the escalators without looking up. "Second level near the railing." Peterson glanced up briefly. "I see her. Purple dress, blonde hair, maybe 6 years old. She's waving at us." The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a voice that carried clearly through the empty mall. "Why won't you look at me?" It was a child's voice, but with an undertone that made my skin crawl. Too articulate, too knowing for someone that young. Peterson kept walking, his hand now resting on the radio. "Don't answer," he said quietly. "Keep moving toward the exit." "I just want to play," the voice continued, now coming from directly above us. "I've been waiting so long for someone to play with." I risked a glance upward and immediately wished I hadn't. The little girl stood at the second-level railing, but something was wrong with her proportions. Her arms were too long for her body, hanging down past her knees, and when she waved, her fingers bent in directions that joints shouldn't allow. "Eyes down," Peterson hissed. But it was too late. The girl had seen me looking. Her laughter resumed, but now it had a triumphant quality, like she'd won some kind of game. She started clapping, and the sound echoed through the mall with the sharp crack of wood hitting wood, rather than the soft pad of small hands. "Run," Peterson said. We didn't run. That would have been abandoning the cart and violating protocol. But we walked very quickly toward the main entrance. Behind us, the clapping continued, joined by the sound of running feet on the upper level. Light footsteps at first, then heavier ones, as if the girl was growing larger with each stride. "Security Station Alpha, this is Peterson. Juvenile contact has escalated. We're evacuating the North Wing immediately." "Copy that. All units maintain perimeter. Do not enter North Wing until sunrise." We reached the central rotunda, where the home plate marker now glowed bright enough to cast shadows. Peterson directed me toward the employee break room behind the customer service desk, a windowless space with vending machines and a few tables where the overnight crew could take their breaks. "Stay here until 6 a.m., he said. "Ingrid will want to debrief you before you clock out." "What about my cart? My equipment?" "We'll retrieve it after sunrise. Right now, the priority is keeping you safe." I slumped into one of the plastic chairs and checked my phone. 4:03 a.m. 3 hours until the end of my shift, and I had already violated Protocol 1 by making eye contact with whatever that thing had been pretending to be a child. Through the break room walls, I could hear the mall settling around me. The hum of climate control, the distant rumble of delivery trucks preparing for the morning shipments, the electronic chirp of security systems cycling through their diagnostics. Normal sounds that should have been comforting, but somehow felt like they were masking other noises, stranger sounds that the overnight shift wasn't supposed to acknowledge. Ingrid arrived 20 minutes later with coffee, and the kind of expression that suggested she'd dealt with protocol 1 violations before. "Tell me what happened," she said, settling into the chair across from me. I described the encounter with the girl, including the moment I'd looked up at her. Ingrid took notes on a tablet, occasionally asking for clarification about timing or specific details. "The arm-length distortion," she said finally. "That's new. Usually they maintain better physical consistency. I stepped into the elevator, and the children moved closer, not threatening but supportive, like they were finally seeing their mission completed. The elevator had no buttons for the lower level, but as soon as I was inside, the doors closed, and it began to descend. The trip down seemed to take much longer than the building's height should have allowed. When the doors finally opened, I stepped out into a corridor that belonged to a different era. 1970s institutional architecture, with cinder block walls and fluorescent fixtures that had long since burned out. Following the sound of breathing, I walked through tunnels lined with pipes and electrical conduits until I reached a maintenance room where an elderly man in a twins maintenance uniform sat beside an old radio, methodically turning the dial through static, looking for a signal that would never come. "Help finally arrived," he said, looking up at me with eyes that held both gratitude and resignation. "Took you long enough?" His name tag read Harold Svensson, and when I helped him to his feet, he felt solid and real, not like the energy impressions that manifested in the mall above. "How long have you been down here, Harold?" "Since October 1985, he said. "Last day of demolition. I was checking the electrical systems one final time when they sealed the access tunnels. Been waiting ever since." As we rode the elevator back up to the mall level, Harold explained how he'd survived on emergency water reserves and MRES left in the stadium's emergency supplies, how he'd tried calling for help on the radio every night for 30 years, and how the children had started appearing after the mall opened, promising they'd find someone to help him. When the elevator doors opened on the main level, the first rays of sunrise were streaming through the skylights. The children were gone, the manifestations had faded, and the home plate marker had returned to its normal temperature. Harold stepped onto the mall floor, looked around at the storefronts and skylights, and smiled. "So this is what they built," he said. "It's beautiful." The twins would have liked this. Sometimes during my rounds, usually around 3 a.m. when the mall is deepest in its overnight transformation, I stop by the home plate marker and think about all the games that were played on that spot, all the families who made memories there, all the emotions that soaked into the ground, over 20 years of baseball seasons. Harold was right. The twins would have liked what they built here. And now that he's free to walk these corridors in daylight, surrounded by the laughter and conversation of new generations making their own memories, I think the place is finally complete. The protocols remain, updated, but necessary. Because even though we solved Harold's situation, the Mall of America is still big enough to fit 7 Yankee stadiums inside it, which means there are still plenty of places where the cameras can't see you, and plenty of corners where sound doesn't travel the way it should. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear the ghost of crowd noise echoing through the empty corridors. Not desperate anymore, but grateful.